Hello, everyone, and welcome to the premiere episode of Learn from My Mistakes. I want to apologize. I originally announced that this episode would air on Saturday, and I ran into a few technical problems, pretty serious technical problems. Number one being that my USB microphone was broken, and the pins on the USB connection were bent, and I got the microphone to work for my podcast, but I could not get it to work for this, and that is going to cause some challenges for my podcast down the road. I'm working on fixing slash getting a different microphone, borrowing one, to make all of these things work, but for now, for today, I am using the microphone on my computer. So forgive, please, the quality of the audio here, and any background noise you might hear, which would have been mitigated a little bit by the microphone use. There's a cat, my landlord's cat, in the backyard who's meowing a little bit. I don't think you guys can hear it at this moment. There is I live with a family right now, and there are children in that family. They may be coming home any minute and making some noise in the kitchen, which is just through that door right there. So if you're hearing some background noise, I'm going to check through the video before I post it. If it's really disruptive, I'll try re-recording. If not, just forgive the background noise and try to focus on what I'm saying. With that, this is Season 1, Episode 1 of Learn from My Mistakes. So I talked a little bit about what this podcast is going to be about, or vodcast, sorry, it's a vodcast, is going to be about. And I want to talk a little more in depth about that because I want you to know, if you're watching and there's a topic that you would like me to cover, or even if you find YouTube videos that go into specifics that I don't get into, please feel free to post those in the comments. This is intended to be helpful for people who are in their late teens, early 20s, maybe even early 30s, because I've met some people in their early 30s who don't know a lot of this stuff, who don't know some things that I had to learn the hard way, and I think it's really important for you to know. I know that when I went to high school, my senior year, we had a class that taught us some basic things that is actually not a prerequisite for graduation. And I really think classes like this should be a prerequisite for graduation. Pardon me as I drink some water. So I'm covering some basic things, and some things aren't so basic, but I've had some friends comment that I wish I had known this before it happened. For example, one of the topics we'll cover is how to cancel a wedding, which sounds really sad, but has been necessary for a few people in my own life, including myself. And so I'll talk about a lot of things in terms of planning a wedding and canceling a wedding, not just how to, but how to avoid getting into a place where you're never going to get any of your money back, right? Those kinds of things. Mostly, though, the first couple episodes are going to be some basic information about what you will need living on your own once you finally leave mom and dad's house. And I'll get into, as I'm talking about this, I'll share my personal stories about how I learned this and how, in some cases, how impactful the experience was on my life. So, without further ado, we're going to get into the first topic, which is is banks versus credit unions. Which one's right for you? So, you're opening a bank account. Let's say you're not living at home with mom and dad anymore, but you're still in high school and you're working a part-time job and you want to open a bank account. First and foremost, you should know if you are under the age of 18, You are not allowed to open a bank account by yourself. Exceptions may be if you are emancipated. Now, if you are emancipated, you want to talk to your caseworker. You had an advocate. So talk to them about opening a bank account. See if they can help you open a bank account. But you have to be over the age of 18 to open your own bank account. Now, this provides some protections, and for some people, it can provide some complications. Okay? So, for those of you who are living in situations where you're concerned that your parents being on your account would cause them to remove money and remove funds, or they may react poorly to some places where you've spent money. You see this sometimes in extremely conservative households where one of the children is gay and comes out of the closet, or is bisexual and is spending money in places. And if their parents have access to their account, they can see that. They can see your transactions. And that may result in poor treatment and really, from my perspective, inappropriate parental behavior towards children. In other cases, like myself, I grew up in a household where my parents, unfortunately, were drug addicts and alcoholics. And I don't know that anyone ever actually stole money from my bank account. I don't think that ever happened. But certainly it was a thought in my mind, and it was a concern in my mind, which is why I instead chose to hide my money in plain sight. Actually would cash my paycheck, and I would hide it we had VHS tapes. That's how old I am. Okay, we had a library of VHS tapes, and I would hide the money in between the tape and the case, and then I would slide it back in place in our library, so nobody knew it was there except for me. And I hid my money there for quite some time, and I would choose different movies to hide different amounts in, just so that it wasn't all in one big bulk amount and thus would be recognizable. But that's what I did. But if you are one of those students or children or minors who feels like your money would be in danger by having your parents' name on the account, or maybe you just have helicopter parents and you don't want them seeing what you're spending your money on, ask a relative or a mentor that's close to you that may not be a relative who is over the age of 18 to help you open that account, and see if they'd be willing to help you do that. And then you can have an account. So it doesn't have to be your parents that you open the account with. It can be any adult that you open an account with. But you, if you're under the age of 18, cannot open one yourself. Okay? So that's really important. Again, I'm not super familiar with emancipation laws. So if you are emancipated, again, like I said before, ask your advocate, talk to your advocate about it, things like that. Okay, another big thing. Let's say you already have a bank account with your parents' name on it. And you turn 18 and you're moving either away from home or you're moving out of the house, just out of the house, you're going straight into the workforce, or you're going to college and you're paying for it all yourself and your parents aren't helping. Remove your parents from your bank account. Okay? There are some fantastic parents out there. I want to say this. There are fantastic parents out there who really don't care what their child does with the money, other than maybe being a little concerned for their responsibility, who would never attempt any kind of thing like I'm about to say. Unfortunately, in our society, there are also parents who do the things that I'm about to say. And the children of those parents are the ones I'm speaking to now. If your parents are helicopter parents in your business all the time and feel like they need to control your life, when you turn 18, remove them from your bank account. Bottom line. If you do not, when you go away to college, when you do whatever and you go out partying with friends, they can see every single purchase you make from your bank account. And let me tell you, I've seen this. I have not personally experienced helicopter parenting, but I've seen it where someone's gone out and pulled out a bunch of cash because they were going on a trip with friends and wanted cash to spend rather than keep using their card. And their parents called them within an hour of them removing the money saying, well, what are you doing? Where are you going? Why'd you take out that much cash? Look, your kid is 18. Let it go, right? Anyway, all of that to say, if you are 18, remove your parents from your bank account, especially if you have those kinds of concerns. Now, the exception I would make is for those of you who have wonderful parents who absolutely support you and want to help you through college. It is easier for them to give you money without fees, without any kind of jumping through hoops, if their name is on your bank account. So if you have parents who are like that, who want to contribute to your bank account while you are at college, it may be better for all of you and less expensive for all of you if you keep their name on the account, because then they can make deposits, right? And if you do have parents who are wonderful enough to want to do that for you, talk with them about it. Talk with them about what they think. Just have a conversation, right? Because if your parents are willing to do that, I think they're pretty cool parents. I'm just saying. Now the question comes, do you want a bank account or do you want a membership at a credit union? What's the difference? So, the main difference, which is responsible for deciding all of the smaller differences, is that a bank is responsible to its investors, okay? So this means that people put money into the bank, investors put money into the bank, and those investors expect dividends. They expect money in return, right? They expect interest on their investment. This usually leads to higher fees associated with bank accounts, high overdraft fees, lower savings interest rates, higher loan interest rates, things like that. Whereas in a credit union, you are a member and you are one of the deciding members. Like, members vote on different things like fees associated with accounts, how high they're going to be, if they need to be raised, if they don't need to be raised. That is the biggest difference between a bank versus a credit union. And with that, with credit unions, you tend to have lower fees associated with accounts and higher interest rates on savings accounts, lower interest rates on loans if they give loans. There's usually a requirement for membership. So my first banking experience was with St. Mary's Credit Union. Those of you who grew up in Marlborough, Hudson, Massachusetts over there are familiar with St. Mary's Credit Union. At the time I was a member, you had to be a member, you had to live in specific zip codes to be a member of the bank. There was nothing really preferential about it. It just happened to be that there were only 2 locations at the time, and that's where the 2 locations were. So you had to be within a certain distance of those locations. So let me tell you how this played out for me. I had a bank account at St. Mary's Credit Union, and then I decided I was going to move states after I graduated high school. Completely moved. Took all the stuff that I needed. I was already living out of the house when I graduated high school. I left early in my senior year and stayed with friends and stayed with friends of friends and all of this until August came, and I got on a bus. I got on a Greyhound bus with all of my stuff, my worldly possessions that I had taken with me, and moved down to Virginia. My first living experience there, I lived in a dorm because I was going to college. But when I got to Virginia, I realized very quickly that I didn't have access to my bank account in Massachusetts. Right? There weren't a lot of options, and this was early 2000, and I think a lot of credit unions have caught on and debit card companies have kind of caught on to the fact that people want access to their money anywhere they go. So this has changed a little bit, but it wasn't so easy to go to a bank and use my bank card to get money out of my account, right? Like, it wasn't that easy because my bank was all the way in Massachusetts, and that's where you had to be in order to bank with them. So I had to think of a different solution, and I went with, at the time, a very well-known bank in the US, specifically because they had branches in the state I was in Massachusetts, where I may or may not be visiting, and in Florida, where I may or may not be visiting. And so I banked with them. When I came out to California, so I've lived in 3 different states. I've lived in Massachusetts, I've lived in Virginia, and now I lived in California. I've been in California for about 18 years. So when I moved out to California, the same bank was here, but I had a very negative experience with them in terms of personal banking experience. And they were not, I've since discovered, they were not very good at taking care of their personal banking customers. Okay? So having experienced both credit unions and an actual bank, if you're not planning on moving, if you're going to stay in the general vicinity that you're in, and you don't plan on traveling a whole lot or moving a whole lot, I would highly recommend that you go with a credit union. Credit unions are fantastic if you can find one. Honestly, they're great. And because their customers are essentially their main concern. They are there to help you, the customer. Whereas at banks, they're there to make money for their investors, right? So if you are planning on traveling, and like myself have lived in multiple different states and are traveling back and forth, I would recommend going with a bank. And more so, depending on where you're going. If you're going to go overseas, go with an internationally known bank. And if you're not going overseas, you can go with a more nationally known bank. So a good example is Bank of America. Bank of America has branches in other countries, and they make international travel a lot easier, especially if you're a traveler. They're also really good at business accounting, so big businesses and things, they're really good at that. The bank I bank with now is US Bank. Let me tell you, I've been with them for 10 years. That's the longest I've had an account anywhere on this planet. And they're number 1 in customer service. They are great with personal banking. They are wonderful. Their customer service people, their customer service representatives are so wonderful. And they've helped me out a lot. I have this problem. I have dyscalculia, which is basically dyslexia with numbers. So I will oftentimes accidentally mix up my change in my transaction register, which I'm going to cover in another episode, and be overdrafted by like 50 cents. And I'm like, ugh, how did I do that? And they're wonderful because, at least with my account, I can choose whether or not I want to be charged an overdraft fee. And I have chosen not to. So what usually happens is, if I use if I do a card transaction, it'll just decline the card if there's not enough money in my account for that, rather than having me incur the transaction fee. And I appreciate that much, much more than being able to do the overdraft. Now, there are some people who prefer, like, I need to pay for this, I need to pay for it now, I want it to be approved, and I'll pay the overdraft fee later, right? There are some people who are like that, and that's great. You can choose to do that with your US Bank account. But I'm not one of those people. So I've been with US Bank now for 10 years, and they have been fantastic. You, if you're watching this, you need to do your own research, okay? Some things that come up that first-time bank and even credit union members don't realize is fees. There are a lot of checking accounts that come with fees associated, and you pay a monthly fee. Okay? I have a free bank account because I was a student and been a student for so long that it's been changed to a free student checking account. And there are no fees associated with that. Now, from what I understand and what I've been researching, a lot of banks now have a free checking account availability. There may be some caveats that come with that. Like you may have to open a savings account in order to get a free checking account, different things like that. But they do offer free checking accounts. So look into that and be sure that you know what kind of account you are getting. Okay? Now, talking about savings accounts almost always have a minimum balance. The one place you don't have to have a minimum balance to have a savings account at is Capital One Online. I also use Capital One. I have 2 savings and a checking all linked together. And that has to do with how my brain processes information and what works best for me. So I have an emergency savings account, and then I have another savings account that is for big purchases. So, like if I'm going to buy a new computer, for example, I will put money in that savings account until I have enough to buy the computer and then move it to the checking account and use it. If I'm planning a trip, I put money into that savings account that is separate from my emergency savings account. Okay? They're 2 separate accounts. And then I put money into my savings account there, and when I'm going on the trip, I move it to my checking account. And that is the debit card I use when I travel. Okay? So online banking is absolutely an option. And I would say if you plan on like not spending more than 1 month in a place, like if you're somebody who travels, and that's what you want to do, you want to become maybe a travel blogger or whatever your plan is in that regard, I highly recommend an online bank account with Capital One. Capital One has ATMs located all around the United States. I'm not sure how they are internationally. I would assume they have some internationally, but they absolutely have them all around the United States. And everything is done online. Everything, right? I transfer money from my bank account to Capital One in order to replenish my savings account, but you can have all of your income direct deposited there. So if you're traveling for business, like you're traveling for work, you can have them direct deposit your paycheck into your Capital One account. And you can split it up even. You can put some in one savings account, some in another, and then some in your checking account. Like you can do that. That's possible. And we'll get into direct deposit in a little bit. I think I talk about it in the next episode when I talk about checks and transaction registers. So what if you're going to have a home base, but you're going to travel from that same home base all the time? What should you do? Look, that's up to you. Okay? There are ways to get around, like if you're part of a credit union, right? There are ways to get around traveling hiccups with that. And from my understanding, they're not so difficult as they used to be back when I was in high school and just starting off in college. It's not as difficult then. Okay? I'm sorry, I don't know if you can hear the child crying in the kitchen, but this is what I go through daily. So basically, you really need to decide what's going to work for you. It would be nice if everyone could have a credit union membership and get great savings account interest rates and everything like that. But if it doesn't work out for your lifestyle, it's not really a good choice, right? And so for me, moving from state to state and then another state to another state, I thought at the time the best choice for me was the bank that I chose. It turned out not to be, because when I got here, I had a lot of problems with them actually being good at customer service, right? Additionally, now that I've been here for a long time, the bank that I'm at now, US Bank, as I've mentioned, is fantastic. And they're exactly what I need, because I still do make trips to the East Coast to visit family members and things like that. I've done things like gone up to Central California, and I literally worked at a camp in the Kings Canyon National Forest for about 8 months. I went not only up there, but then I went down to San Diego, all in the same year. And I always had access to a branch or an ATM somewhere near me in California. So that worked out for me. But if you're planning on traveling to someplace exotic outside of the United States of America, outside of the mainland, it may be a little more difficult for you to use a bank that's not internationally known. And these are things that you need to consider when opening up a bank account. More so than that, you need to consider the fees associated with the bank account that you're opening. Sometimes bank accounts, especially savings accounts, usually always have a minimum amount. So you can't withdraw money below a certain amount, or you're going to get charged a fee for that. And you need to make sure you're reading all this. And if you don't fully understand what you're reading, ask a banker. Like, ask someone there. They have customer service representatives there, always there, to answer questions for potential new account holders, right? I would highly recommend that you do bank shopping if you have the time. If you don't have the time to do all that, which happens often in situations where parents are not supportive parents, and parents are not the best choice in having an account with, in situations like that, ask a family friend or ask a friend of yours or their parents. Ask other people where they bank, why they choose that bank, and if you can, just get a bank account for now to protect your assets at that bank, right? And then you can change later. But if you have the time to spend, I would highly recommend that you do the research, know how much you're paying for your bank account, know, the services and offerings. I didn't know this at the bank that I am at now, US Bank. Let me tell you what happened. After my previous bank experience that was really bad, I went to a completely different bank that does not exist anymore. And that bank was bought out by US Bank. This was probably 11 or 12 years ago now. So I didn't actually choose the bank that I was with. And I stuck it out with them for about 2 years because I wanted to see. I mean, they even went so far as to call me after US Bank purchased the house. US Bank called and they said, we just want to know, we hope you stick with us. This is what we're offering. This is what we're doing, so on and so forth. And I'll never forget that I overdrafted accidentally on something, and I actually incurred a fee. This was before you could choose to opt in to overdraft protection or not. And I called customer service, and the customer service agent said, "Oh, that's not a problem. You get one free overdraft fee reversal per year." And this was at the time. I'm not sure that this is still going on, so US Bank members, don't quote me on that. But it was at the time, and I was like, oh, really? Like, I didn't know that. I hadn't read all the fine print when they sent me the new information for my bank account with them. And I was like, oh, interesting. I had no idea. And I was so grateful for that, because I had gone so long. I had gone, I think, 3 years without ever overdrafting on anything. I was very, very careful. And then all of a sudden this happened because I had forgotten about something, So I was very grateful to them for that. So know what's coming with your account, right? There are often a lot of incentives given for new account holders at various different banks. If your bank is currently not working out for you, look into some new account incentives at other banks. Shop around, see what they're willing to give you, right? Because there's a lot of stuff out there. But the bottom line here is, number one, you must be 18 to open a bank account. So if you're not 18 and you need to open a bank account to become financially independent from your parents, then you absolutely need to find an adult, anybody over the age of 18 who's willing to help you with that, okay? You will need ID. This is something I did not cover here and isn't actually in my notes, but should have been, okay? You're gonna need ID. I think I just added another topic onto this this vodcast as I'm thinking about it, because I don't think I have one that covers how to get ID, right? So the person who goes with you, they need ID, and you need some form of ID to prove you are who you say you are. I believe if you're underage, in some places your school ID will work. If the person, as long as the person who's helping you also has an ID. But things like your social security card, which I will now do an episode on how to go about replacing that, a birth certificate, a picture ID, right? One of the first things that you should do that I did not do when I left home was to get an actual ID card in Virginia. I never had one in Virginia. I didn't have one in Massachusetts. I had a federal. I had my passport that I used for a long time as my ID. And even in California, I didn't have one for years. I didn't have a state ID. I had just my passport. And I quickly realized that that wasn't the best option. So if you are 18 and you're living in the state that you're in, the first thing that you should do before moving out of your house, before leaving your parents' house, is get an ID. It's easiest to do when you're in your parents' house because they usually have access to your birth certificate, your social security, and your social security card. Okay? And you will need those to get a picture ID, a photo ID. And that's all linked together. I will do a whole nother podcast on, vodcast episode on how to go about getting that information. It's becoming easier to get that information when you're not in the state that you were born in, but there are some hiccups there, and I am currently in that place. So I have to go get a real ID because in California we now can't travel without a real ID. It's really expensive in California, in case you were wondering. It's like $36 for a little plastic card with my name and address on it. That's different than the current plastic card that I just got reissued in 2017, right? Somehow they're different, so I have to go get that replaced. And in that, I have no idea where in my room, the loveliness that is my room that I've been in for 5 years, my birth certificate has gone. I know where my social security card is. I have my picture ID, my current photo ID. I have no idea where in tarnation my birth certificate is. I haven't been able to find it. I'm looking over here is a closet with a whole bunch of stuff in it. And I'm looking over here because I'm remembering all the places that I searched and I can't find it. So I'm going to have to contact Hudson, Massachusetts' town hall or city hall to figure out how I can get my birth certificate sent to me and verify my ID and all of that kind of stuff. It's going to be a process. So in that process, I will then tell you how I did it. Okay? And that's, again, if you live in a different state than you grew up in. But if you're in the same state you were born in, you only need to really go to City Hall and present ID and then pay a fee to get your birth certificate. And that is something that you should have a copy of and you should keep on you in a place, separate, hiding. Same thing with your social security card. It's very dangerous to carry your social security card in your wallet now. I would highly recommend, with the incidences of identity fraud, that you keep those documents somewhere else that is not on your person, so that you know where they are and you can bring them to a place that you might need them when you need them, but don't necessarily carry them on you. But that should be a whole nother vodcast for a whole nother day. For now, I'm opening a bank account. What should I know? You should now know everything you will need to know to open up a bank account. Again, do your research, ask a friend for help, ask an over 18 friend for help if you are under the age, and take your parents' name off of your account if you don't want them knowing what you've been up to and if you don't have a really great relationship with them. If you have a great relationship with your parents, talk with them about it, right? Talk with them about whether or not they want to stay on your account. Talk with them about, hey, Mom and Dad, I'd like to remove you from my account now that I'm 18. If they're supportive, they should be fine with that. Okay? So remember, learn from my mistakes. I've told you a couple stories about the things that I didn't know and then learned the hard way and all of that kind of stuff. So I hope you enjoyed this vodcast. The next one will be released next Monday. So I'm on Monday cycles now with this due to the technical difficulties that have come up because of the broken microphone issue, which I'm hoping I'm going to get fixed. I'm bummed. Can I just say that for a second? I'm really bummed. I'm not mad. I want to be very clear. I let people borrow my microphone, and it came back broken, but it was the kind of broken that could have happened on my watch, right? Like, it's a pin inside a USB port bent. That could have happened when I was using the microphone. So I'm not really upset about that. But it's kind of like a guy when something doesn't work on his motorcycle or his car or whatever he's using. That's how I feel right now. I'm like, man, I'm just bummed, That's how I feel about my microphones. I'm just saying. That's how I feel. Anyway, that has nothing to do with this podcast. I don't know why I just shared that story. I don't know. I really don't know. I will, though, now that I'm thinking about it, make another vodcast about letting people borrow things. Maybe that's what I really need to do, is do a podcast about letting people borrow things. Next week's vodcast is going to be on how to use a transaction register, which is really, really important, even if you think it's not, right? I actually told my mom about that one, and my mom doesn't use a transaction register, and she's never had a problem. I have not used a transaction register, but I have encountered several problems. So I think it's important. It's very important, especially for me. I now have multiple different accounts that are doing various different things, right? 2 of them are earning me interest, 2 of them are not. And I have them all over the place and all this kind of stuff. So we're going to talk about transaction registers, what type you should use, if you should use one, so on and so forth. That's going to be the next vodcast. Hope you liked it. See you next week.